Welcome to what surely will be a doozy of a matchup right here, sports fans. Whether your game is on the gridiron, at the diamond, or on the links, we can only say, get up off your seats and get ready for some real action. Welcome to this week's Huddle Up with Gus. 15-year NFL quarterback Gus Frerott's passion for sports has taken him on the field and behind the benches, playing for 7 NFL franchises with 114 TDs under his belt. Gus knows who the players are and how the games are won.
It's not every day you get to hang out with an NFL quarterback, huh?
Okay, sports fans, from the decked out and plush 1631 digital studios, it's kickoff time. So snap your chin straps on and get ready to huddle up with Gus.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Huddle Up with Gus. I'm your host, 15-year NFL quarterback Gus Frerotte. And I want to welcome you to the Huddle Up with Gus podcast. You can check me out at huddleupwithgus.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. I want to thank some of our partners, 1631 Digital News, MFN Operators, these guys, MFN Multiformat Network. These guys are great. They do all my editing and producing for me, and Terry Schulman, who helps me get all my guests. So thank you to all of them. I appreciate you, and I really appreciate you hanging with me through all these 3 years of podcasting. It's been crazy. Today's guest, he's a writer, sports columnist for the New York Post. He's written a new book. As you can see, it's sitting there beside him. But Ian O'Connor is my guest. He just wrote the new book, Coach K, The Rise and Reign. So I wanted to ask you, Ian, reign is such a powerful word. What made you put reign in there?
Well, I think he's been a king of sorts of college basketball for 4 decades. And I think it's rare to see somebody stay at one school that long and be that successful. It's pretty staggering that at age 75, Gus, he still has a chance to win the national championship. I don't know if it's a great chance. His team this year looks good to very good to me, but not great. But it's just, I don't know if we'll see a reign like that again in college basketball. And given all the change in the sport now, you have basically player free agency. I think it's going to be difficult for somebody to match that for 42 years, that level of success, to win nearly 1,200 games, 5 national titles, 12 Final Fours, and maybe counting. So that was the word that came to mind and I thought was appropriate for the title of the book. And so we went with it.
Well, it's amazing. You give all these stats, and my mind, obviously, because of football, goes to people like Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, who you wrote another book for called Belichick, but, that have been in the business for so long. You say these things will never be broken. But before those guys, there were records that they said never would be broken. So right. You can never say never. I think there's always somebody out there that'll do it longer. But Coach K, and as long as he's done it, I mean, it's pretty amazing. But let's get back to your story. So tell me a little bit. I know you grew up in New Jersey. And so what was that thing? How did you fall in love with sports when you were growing up in Jersey?
Probably not a terribly profound story, I guess, and just having a big brother who loved sports, and he passed that down to me. My father was not really a big sports guy. He grew up in New York. He liked the New York Giants baseball team and football team, but he was not really a passionate fan, I would say. So it was my brother, Dan, and interestingly enough, we attended a high school in New Jersey that's pretty famous for being the place where Vince Lombardi learned how to be a coach. Really, he coached football and basketball at St. Cecilia's High School in Englewood, New Jersey. And I was on one of my proud moments was being on the last St. Cecilia football team that made it to the state championship game. And when Lombardi coached there in the 30s, early 40s, they won the mythical national high school football championship, and they beat the team in Brooklyn that Joe Paterno played for. And so that was always a cool association for me to have attended St. Cecilia and knowing that Lombardi, that was the only place he had been a head coach before the Green Bay Packers.
Isn't that amazing?
And, yeah, it is. Right. He was a great assistant with the Giants. He was at Fordham, but really before his 1 year with Washington, before he tragically died, the only 2 places he had ever been a head coach were the Packers and St. Cecilia. So we were pretty proud of that.
What was that tradition like at St. Cecilia? Because obviously he started something. was like practice is pretty tough. I mean, you got to remember some of that, like going through 2 days and all those types of things. What do you remember specifically that today did? Because you think the coaches would always have. I mean, you got a guy like Vince Sabardi. You're always quoting him, or you're always saying something about him. Was it like that for you?
It was, and obviously you played in the NFL for 15 years, so I'm talking about football here at a much, much lower level. But I think you'll understand that there's, no matter what level you play football at, there's certain things that you remember, like whenever the grass is cut, like for the first time in a summer, and you smell that cut grass, I always think of triple sessions and double sessions in high school. And I only played 1 year of small college football, Division III. But there are certain things that the smell of that cut grass, and if I pass a field and I see a team practicing, I immediately flash back to double sessions and triple sessions. And back then, what amazes me is I'll watch an NFL practice now, and I actually think that our practices in high school were tougher. There's very little hitting. There's very little running. I see a lot of standing around. I have to say, I'm always shocked at NFL practice today because coaches have to save their players for Sunday. And I'll never forget being on the field at the NFC Championship game 2011, Giants 49ers, in the rain at Candlestick. So I got on the field for the last fourth quarter. That game went into OT. And the speed and violence of the NFL game, and certainly you lived it, and I didn't, but I thought I knew a little bit about football just having played from 7th grade through 1 year of small college. And it was unbelievable, the speed, the violence of it. And I knew nothing. So I have a great respect and appreciation for people who did it at that level. And, but I love football. Obviously, I'd love to see it somehow become safer through equipment advances. And I still don't quite understand why helmet technology can't catch up to the speed of the game and to try to offset the number of concussions we see. So, but I've always loved football. And I think that it taught me a lot of life lessons, really primarily just don't quit. There were plenty of times when, since I went to a small Catholic high school, we would practice as freshmen with the varsity and just physically get beaten up every day by seniors. And there were a lot of days I just wanted to hang it up and go hang out with my friends after school. And my brother really wouldn't let me do that. So I'm glad that happened. And I stayed with it for those 4 years. And by the time you're a senior, obviously you're on the other side of it. So football taught me a lot of life lessons that I still really value today.
Yeah. So when did the writing side of it come in for you, right? So you have the sports background. You loved football. I'm sure you loved basketball and baseball as well growing up around New York. I mean, there's so many different sports that you can watch, hockey, everything is there. So when did the writing side kick in for you to say, you know what, I'm really good at this and I like doing this?
I was never good in math. I was okay in math, Gus, but I was always better in English and writing.
Well, why do they make us learn algebra? Who uses that like stuff? Seriously.
Well, yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
And I'm sure at Marist they made you take finite math. Like, what is that?
I don't remember taking finite math at Marist. I stayed away from that as much as I could. So actually, when I was a freshman at Marist, I had a faculty advisor who, he was actually an advisor to the student newspaper too. So the first time I sat down with him, he's now a lawyer at the New York Times. And he actually wrote the famous letter to Donald Trump from the New York Times some years ago after Trump sued the Times, and his letter went viral. But His name was David McCraw, and he said, "So what do you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I love sports, but my goal was to be the next Roger Staubach. That's not going to happen." He was my idol growing up. I was a Dallas Cowboys fanatic, and
how'd you get to be a Dallas Cowboys fanatic when it sounds like the Giants were the team in your household?
Yeah. So the Giants were, but they were terrible, and the Jets were terrible too. So, and as you might know, back then there was no such thing as cable TV. So you had CBS, NBC, ABC, and that was it. So you would get one national game every Sunday, and you'd have Monday Night Football. The big thing growing up, Monday Night Football was the halftime highlights outside of Howard Cosell and Meredith and company. It was it was amazing that you had a whole generation of fans waiting to see the halftime highlights, because we didn't see the games around the league. We only saw the Giants and the Jets. But the one national game on Sundays was usually the Dallas Cowboys, the star in the helmet, Tom Landry with the hat. But I loved Roger Staubach, and he was really the first athletic quarterback who was, and Landry hated it, but he would move around and he was exciting to watch. So I became a Cowboys fan because the Giants were terrible and the Cowboys were in my living room almost every Sunday.
Yeah.
And so in college, I had a faculty advisor who said, "What do you like to do?" I said, "Well, I love sports and I'm pretty good in my English courses." And he said, "Why don't you put the two together and try writing for the student newspaper?" So I did that, and one thing led to another, and it just started a career that I've loved really for the better part of 4 decades.
Yeah, the story is so similar to many authors I've had on, even writers and that have, Mike Silver, Peter King, all those guys that have written for sports, where they say, I love sports growing up. I played as much as I could, but then I get to college and I got to figure out what it's kind of like your story. Let's figure it out. And then you go from there. Did you go anywhere after Marist, or did you go right into work, like an internship somewhere?
Yeah, I got what they call the fellowship. It was a glorified internship through the Pulliam Fellowship Program. They picked 20 young aspiring journalists around the country. 10 went to Indianapolis to work for the Indianapolis Star for 3 months. 10 went to Phoenix to work for the 2 newspapers out there. So I went to Arizona. Now it was 110 degrees in the shade every day. Yeah. I had this beat up 76 orange Pinto that had no air conditioning. And I'll never forget parking it in the sun and going inside and working and coming out 6 hours later and forgetting that it was sitting in literally 110 degrees in the sun all day. And I grabbed the handle. My hand almost burned off.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. But yeah, that was a 3-month program and my first pseudo job. And so they gave me a lot of assignments going out to Phoenix Suns.
Wait. Did you drive the Pinto across country?
I did. Yeah. It took me, I did about 600 miles. Did I do 800 miles a day? I'm trying to remember how long it took me to get there. I did it in, I think, 4 days.
So what did you listen to? Because what did it have in it?
I think I listened to Springsteen cassettes.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly. Maybe a little Elton John. So yeah, and it got me there. Barely. Now on the way back, it broke down in Tennessee. And so this is late August, maybe early September, and it just couldn't make it back. I had 100,000 miles on it. It was this orange Pinto, and it broke down in Tennessee. And I got to a gas station, and I forget what was wrong with it, but there was more than one thing wrong with it. So the guy in the gas station, I think he saw I was a Yankee from New Jersey, and he overcharged me. I know that. I waited there for about 5 hours, and whatever he fixed, I paid a lot of money for. And then I was on my way and made it back. So that was quite an adventure.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. This is Gus Frott with Huddle Up with Gus. You can check me out wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We're talking with Ian O'Connor. Ian wrote a new book, titled Coach K. But Ian, you've written a lot of other books. You're giving us your history on your past. And I think it's so important because the way we remember things, and then as a writer, you're going to write about somebody else's memories and stories. And so I listened to a show where you were talking about Coach Belichick when you wrote his book, but he would tell people, don't talk to Ian Connor. Don't tell him the stories because, whether those are his stories and he wants to tell them, but you're trying to find out those stories for your book. So when you do that and you find those roadblocks, how do you get through those roadblocks? Because I'm thinking like my Pinto broke down in Tennessee. How am I going to get home?
It was sort of like that. And I guess Belichick put so many obstacles in my way. I felt like one of his players. Like it made me better, made me more resourceful, made me work harder. And he asked a lot of people not to talk to me. And not all of them listened to him, frankly. And some did. They just didn't want to be quoted by name, but they wanted those human stories about him told because they had seen his capacity for kindness and just being human away from the facility, away from press conferences at the stadium. And he played a role for a reason. his goal in every press conference was to give out as little information as possible, because he saw coaches around the league make that mistake where Belichick would learn things about their preparation and game plan going into Sunday's game, and he would use that against them. Yeah. So, and he had a reason to run his program the way he did and to project a certain image to the public. But away from the stadium and his job, he had a human side. And I think some of his friends just said, despite his wishes, I'm going to tell some of these stories and anecdotes to humanize him. And afterward, when the book came out, of course, Bill never said anything about it to me anyway, yeah. But his friends, some of them did. And John Bon Jovi, who had been a longtime friend, believe it or not, he saw me at the Super Bowl, and he told me that he read the book and he thought it was very fair. He thanked me for that. And he said a lot of Bill's friends feel the same way. Then he asked me, he said, did Bill say anything to you about it? And I said, John, you've known him for 40 years. Do you really think Belichick's going to come up to me and pat me on the back for an unauthorized book on his life? Yeah. I don't think so. So I got a kick out of that. He laughed. But my goal is always fairness. That's the most important thing, to be fair to the people I'm chronicling and delivering, hopefully, a defining portrait of them. And I think I pulled it off.
Yeah, no, I think you did too. So the first book you wrote, was that the Arnold and Jack?
No, actually, it was called The Jump. And
it was the high school book, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so you're writing columns and stories for papers and things like that. Then what was the influence to write your first book? Is it something you always wanted to do?
Yeah. And I should have started earlier. It took me a long time to get to that first book. So how old was I? I was about 39. And I knew I had heard so many stories about how difficult it was, particularly if you have a day job. So you're really working 2 full-time jobs. Yeah. And so it took me a while to finally take the leap. And then I did. And what I decided to do back then, high school basketball players could jump straight to the NBA. Yeah. Was profile that process, really. And there was a kid named Sebastian Telfair, Stephon Marbury's cousin, who was a legend, a phenom in Coney Island, Brooklyn. And he was only 5'11", 6 feet, and he was considered one of the 2 or 3 best high school players in the country. I thought he had a fascinating name and backstory. His goal was to get his family out of the projects and make the jump from high school to the NBA. So I spent the year with him and his high school team in Brooklyn, Lincoln High. And it was really, it was obviously about his life, but it was really more a book on the process, where you had agents, sneaker companies, big time Division I recruiters, NBA general managers and scouts and executives all involved in the process, and just how crazy that was his senior year for him to navigate all of that. And it was a fascinating roller coaster journey. And it was one thing about it. Now, later, my next book was on Arnie and Jack, Palmer and Nicholas. Their careers were already over, so it was part of history. This was happening in real time, and anything could have happened. He almost had a serious injury in the middle of that season, which probably could have killed the book. So that was quite a ride, and I learned a lot. I really taught myself how to write a book in that process, and I think it set up the books to come. Yeah, that had to be an amazing, because how long typically were your articles? When you're writing and putting something, they get edited down, they have to fit in a certain space. And now you're writing a book I can put whatever I want in this. Yeah, that's a good question, Gus. And so the average column, I was working for the New York Daily News and then for Gannett newspapers and USA Today in New York. And so the average column would be, say, 850 to 900 words. Obviously, a book, you're talking about more than 100,000 words. And so as you're describing scenes in a book, it was almost liberating because you can let it breathe. And where if you're limited to 875 words, you have to get to the point quickly, and you can't let too much breathe in that column. You have to get to the point and tell the reader what you want to say and get out. So it actually was I enjoyed that part of it. I like storytelling, and I liked letting some of those anecdotes and stories breathe and have space. And so the one regret maybe with the Belichick book was I think it was too long in retrospect. My Krzyzewski book, Coach K book, is shorter. The Belichick book, I initially handed in at like 240,000 words. We cut it down to about 213,000 and probably should have come down to about 185 or 190. Coach K is about 153,000 words. And that to me is about right. But the Belichick challenge was the greatest challenge of my career. Most of my books, I spent 2.5 years. Belichick was 3.5. And I really felt like I was standing at the base of Mount Everest, looking straight up at the start of that process. So
where do you even begin, right?
Yeah. And obviously these people have lived very full, rich, great American lives. So it was a challenge to keep it at a certain length. But Belichick, in retrospect, if I had to do one thing over, I would have made it shorter.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you. So you've written 5 books, and then every book you go through, I mean, you're writing about prolific people, right? The captain, Arnie and Jack, and, these are people that are at the tops of their sports and what they're doing. And I was going to ask you, what did you learn from each book that you wrote that you wanted to do in the next book?
Well, first, just like you as a quarterback, you try to learn from every game and get better the next game. So I was just trying to get better with each book. And like with Belichick, okay, I thought it was, if I'm being honest, and I am asking everybody else to be honest with me, I have to be honest with myself. I think it was too long. So I made sure Krzyzewski wasn't as long. And so I think what I've learned about these figures is just what made them great, say, starting with Jeter, going through Belichick and Krzyzewski, their work ethic and attention to detail and treating every day like it's Game 7 of the World Series, whether it's the offseason, regular season, or postseason, is a common theme I see in their careers. It's that consistency of approach every single day. And I think people ask, why did Tom Brady leave New England? And you saw him go to a coach who had the opposite approach. Bruce Arians' motto is win or lose, we booze. That's not exactly Bill Belichick's philosophy on football or life. So I think after 20 years of every day being like Game 7 of the World Series, it caught up to Brady. It's a credit to him and to Belichick that they could last that long. It's amazing. You could have an all-time great at both of those positions, probably the best ever to do it at coach and quarterback. They actually stayed together for 20 years. It's pretty amazing. But I think the everyday urgency, whether it was mini camp in May or a playoff game, after 20 years of that, Brady needed a break. And Arians represented that break with a, hey, Tom, let's try to sneak in 9 holes after practice and grab a beer if we can. I think he needed that for a couple of years. Yeah. And so I found that to be a common thread in the figures, these iconic, great players and coaches that I've chronicled in these books.
Yeah, you see that a lot about Kobe, a lot of the little, like with information you see on whether it's social media or you're watching something else on Kobe, it was always, you see a player going, well, I was going to go to the gym at like 5:00 and I get there and Kobe's already got ice on his knees and he's already finished his workout. Right. And I think that's the mentality that these great people always have, whether you're a coach, a player, whatever it is in life, right. Or you're an author. Right. It's just gone to the next level. One question I had for you was, I don't know why this popped in my mind, but last year I had a local guy that I'm a friend with and he's a Democrat. And I was trying to go knock door to door for him and just help him out. And he's a friend of mine. And I found it like very tough. Like I couldn't do it. Like I didn't know who was behind that door. I didn't know who I was talking to. So for you as an author, you're going through and he talks about how you're people that played for coach and people that were friends with them. And every book is like that. When you're cold calling or trying to figure out who to talk to, is that more nerve-wracking than anything? Because you don't know what they're going to say.
Well, it used to be when I was younger. Now, so I'm 57. I've been doing this for 36 years, not as much anymore. Sometimes, occasionally, you'll be reaching out to somebody. I find the most difficult thing, and by the way, I was knocking on doors when I was a kid, delivering newspapers, looking to collect my weekly fees, and people were hiding behind those doors. I knew they were in there. Every Thursday night, I would go, we called collecting. There were people who just didn't want to pay their subscription fee. And I'm a 12-year-old kid knocking on doors. So that was nerve-wracking. I remember back then, sometimes you got yelled at and get off my porch and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was a different day back then. You weren't calling anybody. There was no text. You had to go knock right on that door.
Absolutely right. So I'll say this: the one time I am really, I force myself to make these phone calls because you have to, is when people have suffered tragic circumstances in their families, the loss of a loved one, and particularly when it's fairly recent. I really have to coach myself before I make that call. Okay, how would I feel if I were this wife whose husband was just killed in a tragic car accident, and I'm calling to interview her about his life? And this happened 2 weeks ago, but the circumstances dictate that I need to try to reach her now for, say, a newspaper column or even a book. And I've been in that situation a lot, even, frankly, victims of suicide and calling relatives. And that's really when it hits home, and I have to put myself in the shoes of that person I'm calling and be really gentle in the initial call and approach, and be human and understand if these people scream at you, if they hang up on you, just understand that's part of it. You might do the same thing to them if they called you in that, under those circumstances. So that's when it really, like, I wish I didn't have this job, to be honest with you. I do not want to call this person at this moment, but it's my job and I do it. And I just try to be as human as possible in those moments.
Yeah, you definitely have to have a lot of empathy when you call somebody going through those things. That's the same way with me. My dad was one of 15 kids, right? And so I've been to a lot of funerals, and I still don't know the right things to say sometimes when somebody passes. You know, from being an altar boy when I was a kid to I'm still going to funerals from my dad's side of the family. And you don't always know. It's just empathetic. I'm sorry, you know, and that's all you can do, and try to listen as much as you can, because usually they want to say something, right? They usually want to talk.
Yeah, and when I try to, if I get to, and usually I do, I can get to, here's why I'm calling. I want to honor this person who just died, and tell me, I want to make sure people remember this person. Let's talk about his or her life and the contributions they made. And I had a woman once, her husband was a coach, a college football coach, and he committed suicide. And, or now, I'm sorry, I should say he died of suicide. Yeah. And so she was, at first she said, well, you know, I don't know you. I'd love to talk about him. But so she said, well, let me talk to you off the record. So I said, okay, fine. So we did. We had a long conversation. It was over an hour. And at the end, she said, I'll tell you what, it's everything I just said is on the record. So you write the story. I trust you to do it the right way based on the questions you've asked me here, and send me the story and we'll see. So I did. I wrote it. I sent it to her. And about 2 weeks later, I came back from dinner with my wife, and my message light was blinking. And I hit the button, and it was her voice. And I immediately hit stop. And I just asked my wife to leave the room, you know, because I didn't want her to be there in case this was not the kind of message I wanted to hear. And she felt I violated her trust or didn't honor it. So she left, and I sort of gathered myself, because this woman had just put a lot of trust in a stranger. And I played the message, and thankfully it was, thank you for honoring the faith I put in you. And it was a great piece. And you portrayed my words and thoughts and feelings exactly as I expressed them to you. Thank you for doing that. And I think she actually said, you restored my faith in humanity, before hanging up. So that was one of the great messages I've ever received. And so.
No, that's really good. That's what it's all about when you get those kind of things that makes you feel like your work, I got to keep going. This is really good at what I'm doing, and I'm honoring these people. So that is awesome. So in your books that you wrote, and your last one about Coach K, do you feel like you've done that with all of these books that you've written?
Yeah, and it is a great challenge. You talk to hundreds of people, and at the end, you're left with a lot of information, a lot of stories and anecdotes, Gus, and you try to weave it together to tell the tale of this person's life. Now, listen, and I many people at Duke University, I said in advance, you're not going to love every paragraph in this book, because I cover the flaws and the mistakes. That has to be covered in an honest account of somebody's life. And so you prepare them for that. And frankly, I went down to Duke months before publication and laid out all of what would be the perceived negatives in the book. So they knew in advance in case they wanted to comment or Mike wanted to comment on or off the record. I think that's pretty important, that you have to give the subject of your unauthorized biography the opportunity to understand, okay, if I get something wrong with a positive, you're not going to care. If I get something wrong with a negative, a perceived negative, you're going to care. So here's what they are. Let's talk about it. So I do give that opportunity to everyone I write a book about.
So you don't think that Coach K would give you a profanity-laced sideline rant for the book?
Well, I
heard you do a podcast where you said you sat behind him and you couldn't believe it. It was amazing. Like my dad would have been in heaven. Like I learned my first swear word when I was like 6, and I was like, "What's that mean?" He goes, "You'll find out someday." Yeah,
right. And I cursed too, so I wasn't offended by it, but I was entertained and surprised. I sat behind him in 1999 at an NCAA tournament game for the first time, and I was blown away by the nature of the profanity and just how relentless it was. And then I found out other people, that's how Coach K is in the game. And I said to myself, there are a lot of people, a lot of grandmothers in America who love him if they ever sat near him. I don't know if they'd love him anymore. And so it is interesting that that's a part of his approach that usually surprises a lot of people.
And, we didn't get into a lot. I know you've talked a lot about his relationship with Bobby Knight, but I feel like when he went to West Point and was in the military, there's no words that aren't out, right? They're out there. Bobby Knight was a guy who was going to say whatever he wanted to say. Do you think a little bit of that comes from Coach Knight? I know that, swearing is something that we kind of learned from our parents and things, but Bobby Knight, as much as they don't have a relationship anymore, that was probably something that he heard a lot of from one of his mentors.
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, obviously Bob Knight and the way he coached at Army, but upperclassmen at West Point when Mike was a plebe and then a sophomore, just getting verbally berated by if you did something at West Point that was against the code, even a minor thing, like when you walk at West Point, you're supposed to square off all of your turns in a stairwell, or if you're walking toward class, and make every turn at a 90-degree angle. And if you cut it off a little sloppily, you get berated by an upperclassman right in your face, screaming really tough, degrading things. So that's how Mike was raised. That's how he was taught in basketball and really in college or at West Point at the military academy. That's how you lead. That's how you inspire people. So I do think that shaped him in a pretty profound way.
I would say he probably did that everywhere except when he coached in the Olympics, because grown men probably from the NBA, those guys aren't being coached like that.
You can't scream profanities at LeBron James and Kobe Bryant and Jason Kidd and Chris Paul. No, he wasn't doing that. But a couple of Duke players told me when he got back from Beijing in 2008, he became more player friendly, and that just being around the some of the greatest players to ever play, it changed him a little bit at Duke. So he would still scream and yell and curse, but Brian Zuback was the guy in the 2010 national championship game against Butler, who he told to miss that free throw at the end intentionally. He was one who told me that Coach K changed a little bit after the Olympics.
Well, that goes to show that we all can change. So I know you got to go, but I appreciate you spending time with me. So tell us all where we can find your book and where we can follow you.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Gus. And Amazon.com is a great place to get the book. Bookstores everywhere. And I'll keep it to that. I just want people to get a chance to read the book. And on arguably, I think the greatest college basketball coach of all time. I would put him slightly ahead of John Wooden on that Mount Rushmore of college basketball coaches.
Well, he's done it since 1980, so it's an amazing feat. I mean, probably that's when he went to Duke. He was doing it before that. But anyway, I appreciate you, Ian. You can check Ian out at Ian. Is it /O'Connor.com? Is that your website? Ian O'Connor.com?
Yeah, that's Ian _O'Connor is my Twitter handle, and Ian -O'Connor without the apostrophe is my website.com. Right.
Wow, you made it hard for me. I mean, I've been hitting the head a lot, so those hyphens and underscores really get tough for
me. Me too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, Ian. So check him out on Amazon.com. Go get his new book. Read about Coach K. You're going to find out a lot of amazing information that Ian digs out from friends, family, players, and people that have been around Coach K for more than 40 years. So, Ian, thank you so much for joining me on Huddle Up with Gus.
It was my pleasure, Gus. Thank you.
All right, everyone. That's another episode of Huddle Up with Gus. Appreciate you joining us. Check us out at huddleupwithgus.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Thanks to my guys at sounder.fm that host my podcast. Those guys are doing wonderful. Just great new partnership with iHeartRadio. So go get them, Sounder. You guys are doing awesome. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ian. And we'll see you next week on Huddle Up with Gus.
And that's a wrap, sports fans. Thanks for joining in the fun at the 1631 Digital Studios for another action-packed Huddle Up with Gus, featuring 15-year NFL quarterback Gus Frerotte. Huddle Up with Gus is proudly produced by 1631 Digital Media and is available on Apple Music,